Gondwana Records podcast.
Gondwana Records podcast.
Welcome back to Gondwana Records podcast with Jasmine Myra, saxophonist, composer, and band leader who just released her second album, Rising. My name is Mari from Gondwana Records and thank you for joining us. On our last episode,
you have to go through difficult things in life and it can be a positive, and that's why the music on Horizons is so positive in general.
Jasmine talked about how her musical journey began and the stories behind her debut album, Horizons. On this episode,
that's what Rising is about, really, is continuing to build confidence.
We celebrate her second album, Rising, and her growing confidence. To close the show, we have a Q&A session and Jasmine will answer questions from her fans. So let's start.
Gondwana Records podcast.
So, how has your life been since you released the first album?
Busy. No, it's been great. It was just so nice to see how well the first album was received and to gain support from listeners and to be able to do some really cool gigs as well. It's just been a really fun year. It's felt like a bit of a dream as well, without sounding too cheesy, but it's just, this is exactly what I want to be doing. So it's just been great, getting to experience it and learn a lot as well. It's definitely been stressful, but it's in a lot of ways just feeling out of my comfort zone, I guess, but it's good.
And how do you feel about releasing the second album? Obviously it's quite different.
Exciting because I feel more confident as an artist, so it's nice to release something feeling like I've found my feet a bit in writing and the sort of sound that I want to have. It's a bit of pressure because I want people to like it as much as they like Horizons, and it's scary the thought of it being compared to that, or but in general it's exciting. I'm excited.
Very exciting. And you mentioned that the new album, Rising, is a continuation of the Horizons.
Yeah.
But could you properly introduce about what this album is about to the listeners, please?
Yeah, so I would say it's a continuation because Horizons, like I mentioned, was all about working through mental health and that period of lockdown. And I really did come out the other side of that feeling like I'd resolved those issues. And then from there, I wanted to continue to sort of build confidence and really keep growing to love who I am more and to find, self-possession, I guess. And that's what Rising is about, really, is continuing to build confidence, quiet confidence. I think there's something really powerful in just feeling really comfortable in yourself, not in an arrogant way, but just in a not having to prove yourself to anyone and just knowing what you're about. And it's all of those things, basically.
And let's talk about the creative process, how this album started and how you went into the studio or composed.
So I think my process hasn't changed too much from writing Horizons to writing this, I start on my own with like all my compositions. It's not until they're kind of nearly finished or finished that I'll then go and share them with the band. And basically I'll just sit. I start by listening to a lot of music and trying to get inspired or work out sort of things that I like from different songs, and from there I'll sit down on, I use Sibelius to write, and I'll just write out little ideas, and it will be different each time. Like it could be a piece of melody or some chords or like a riff or something. It generally just starts with like one little idea and I'll build it around that, and I just sit with my MIDI keyboard and try like mess around and come up with things and follow my ear for most of it, I guess. Just kind of go from there with songs. So one thing that I find really useful, or that I go back to a lot when I'm writing, is if I can't think of anything, or if I've got kind of creative block, I'll just write lots of little ideas, and I think that takes away the pressure. So it could even be like 4 bars, and then I'll leave it and come up with another 4 bars and leave it. So I'll have all these like files on my computer of just tiny phrases, and then I'll like flick through them and try and add to them, and if I can't think of anything, it's fine, move on to the next one, until like the ball is rolling with one of them. I think I do that quite a lot, actually.
So are you good at dealing with the creative blocks?
That's one thing that helps, but not always. I think when I have creative block, I don't force it, is one thing that I've learned. I think if you try and add pressure to a creative block, it's going to make it worse, is what I find anyway. Forcing it is just never ever going to work. So that's why the ideas thing helps, because you're not sat at one idea, just losing your mind trying to come up with something. You're saying, okay, I'll leave you, I'll go on to the next idea. And I think that can be applied to just writing in general. If I sit down and I can't think of anything, maybe that's because I need to step away and go for a walk.
Yeah.
Or just have a day off and then come back to it. But it's hard to not get stressed out when it doesn't come sometimes.
Was there any new challenge that you brought into to make this album?
For this album, a challenge that I wanted to give to myself maybe was to have more of a presence in the music, like as a saxophonist. I really enjoy just writing for the band and sharing out the like melodies and everything equally, and I find that really satisfying as a writer, kind of experimenting. But I think that did mean on Horizons I wasn't necessarily always the lead instrument, so I think in Rising I wanted to stand out more as a saxophonist as well as a writer. I hope that is, has worked, but that was definitely challenging and scary, because I think I feel most insecure about my playing, and it was made me feel very sort of vulnerable and outside of my comfort zone. But it was like, listening back to it, I'm happy with how I sound on it, and it was a good challenge to like step up a bit.
Gondwana Records podcast.
Let's talk about Glimmers because it's quite different from
Yes.
other tunes. How did you come up with the song? How did it rise into you? Yeah.
I think that started as just like a chord progression, and it's like the intro to the track. That was the first idea that I wrote down and then built around it. And I'm not sure where it came from. I guess it sounds more kind of hip-hoppy, I guess. And I've always been into hip-hop, and like actually some of the first music that I wrote for my band before I started working with Gondwana was a lot more hip-hop inspired. So I guess that was maybe just me like stepping back into that sound and seeing how it would fit with the sound that I've like developed.
Who is your favorite hip-hop artist or producers?
I really love and have always loved MF Doom. He was one of the first like hip-hop artists that I started listening to. Well, it was actually Mad Villainy. I just think like Food is such a weird, cool album.
Gondwana Records podcast.
Your music is so spiritual and beautiful and uplifting. Who would be your favorite spiritual jazz player? And is there any album that you always go back to?
You know, weirdly, I don't really have like, I don't listen to a lot of spiritual jazz, if I'm being completely honest. And it's not that I am not open to it or that I don't like it. I just think it's funny, people call my music spiritual, and I think it definitely is that, and I like that, but I would never have considered myself like a spiritual jazz artist.
Yeah.
I think, it was never a side of jazz that I listened to so much, honestly.
That's interesting. What would be the jazz record that you always go back to? What would that be?
The jazz record. I always end up going back to, there are a few. So Kenny Wheeler, this is an album that I bang on about all the time. Music for large and small ensembles. That's got to be one of my favourite contemporary jazz albums. And also Cannonball Adderley, Them Dirty Blues, like that's one of my all-time favourite jazz albums as well.
You listen to a lot of music to get inspired, then you write. What were you listening to when you're creating this album?
I was listening to a lot of different things. Like, I was listening to a lot of Micaiah McCraven, actually. I really, really love his music, in particular In These Times. That's an album that I've been listening to loads. I think I was listening to a lot of Shabaka as well, particularly like Shabaka and the Ancestors.
What would be the song? Is there a song that has a story that you want to talk about in this album?
There's this song called From Embers. That track is kind of about what inspired the start of that journey as well, the rising journey and continuing to grow confidence. And this was I don't know why my music seems to stem from just like difficult experiences. And I managed to twist them into really like positive sort of explanations. But basically, when I was starting to write the album or wanted to start writing it, I was at kind of a low point. I've had a few difficult things, life things happen to me all at the same time, basically. One of which was I lost my job. Another was my dog died. And then there were a few more things, and they all just hit me at the same time. And that was just really difficult. And I remember when that all happened, I went and stayed with my best friend in Manchester just for a couple of days. She was like, come and stay, and like we can just do wholesome things together and talk about it and all of this. And I remember her saying to me, you're gonna have a phoenix moment. Like, it's so cheesy. You've hit rock bottom now, and you're just in the ashes, and just wait, like it's only up from here basically, and the next couple of years you're gonna rise up. And her saying that to me just gave me so much like hope and really helped me to deal with how bad I was feeling at that moment. So that's why I wanted to name that track From Embers. It was kind of after that conversation, and that inspired the whole album as well, I guess, and really gave me a positive mindset when I was writing the music for it as well.
Gondwana Records podcast.
So you're going on the tour, and in May you're all over UK. What do you most like about playing music live, and how are you feeling about presenting your new music to your audience?
I'm really excited. I'm excited to play the new music because it'll be something fresh, and just to share it as well, because we've been working on it for so long. I really get a lot out of performing the tunes live, because I love playing with my band, and for me it's really emotional getting to like hear my music come to life when they play it. And especially, with the music from Horizons, we're also comfortable with it now that they can relax and like bring their own thing that they want to bring to each performance, and it always changes a little bit, and that's really exciting and it's so nice for me to hear like every time we perform. But also getting to see people's reactions, hear how they've connected with it, to even get to share the meaning behind the music as well, so that people understand what they're listening to. And then whenever I chat with people after the gig, and when people say, you know, this is how this song helped me, or like, I can understand where you were coming from when you spoke about this, it really resonated with me, or like, it's just so lovely to actually get to connect and chat with the listeners, and I really enjoyed that part of it.
Enjoy the tour.
Yeah.
Yeah, and congratulations with a very beautiful album.
Thank you.
Gondwana Records podcast.
We're going to move on to the Q&A. We have more questions from your fans. The first question is from James Slim. When will you play a show in New York City?
Who knows? I would love to play a show in New York, but yeah, who knows when that'll happen. Hopefully not too far into the future. One day.
Okay. Also, Bruno Lopes is waiting for you in Brazil.
Nice.
Where would be your dream city to play?
I mean, New York is definitely on the list. I don't have one dream city where I'd love to perform, to be honest. I want to keep performing in Europe, and I've got a lot out of doing that this year, and it would be great to try and go further afield as well. I would love to perform in Japan. I've never been to Japan, and it's somewhere that I've always wanted to visit, and I think it would be really cool to get to play there as well.
Oh, I hope you go to Japan too. The next question comes from Captain Stupido. Funny name. But serious question. What are some of the emotional themes of your music?
Well, mentioned on the last podcast maybe, I like to, well, not even I like to, I always end up writing music that is connected to like what I'm going through or what I've been through. And for me, a lot of that is mental health. I feel like I spend a lot of time thinking about like mental health and positivity and mindfulness and all these things, kind of, I guess, like psychology. And I always find my music becoming connected with those themes. But definitely putting a positive spin on it, and how you can sort of work towards feeling comfortable with yourself, or like self-acceptance, all of those things, I guess.
Thank you. Next question comes from Benjamin J. I would like to know how you approach writing, whether you start with an improv melody, jam, or written, and what influence led you to specific sound.
Yeah, it's usually just writing, like I mentioned earlier, but that can take different, like I said, it's never one set way, kind of just depends. And I think my influences are kind of a mix between jazz and like electronica, and more recently more folky stuff as well, I guess.
Who is your favorite electronica artist?
I'd Bonobo. I love Bonobo, yeah.
The next question comes from M. Makarchuk. Have you ever thought about including international instrument in your music? For example, Duduk.
That's an interesting question. It's something that I'm definitely open to. I think I would be wary of trying to write for an instrument that I didn't know a lot about. And a lot of the time when I write for different instruments, it's because I'll have a musician in mind who I want to work with. But, you know, maybe that's something that I should consider for future, kind of learning more about different instruments or trying to think of different musicians that I could write for or collaborate with.
You share a harp player.
Yes.
With Matthew.
Yeah.
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 How are you enjoying having a harp player on your band?
I love the harp. It's so cool. It's so beautiful. I like writing for it as well. I just think it brings such a beautiful, light sound to the music.
Thank you. The last question comes from Forgonia. Do you have any tips of coping with balancing life and creativity?
That's a great question. It relates, I guess, to what I was saying about creative block. I don't think it's very easy to be free and creative if you're not looking after yourself or if you're trying to force something. I think it's important to always put yourself first and take care of yourself, and then from that you'll be able to relax and get into a good mindset and a good headspace to create. It's almost like it's more efficient to spend less time trying to create. It's not about the hours that you put in necessarily. You could spend 10 hours sat in front of your instrument or your computer. If your brain is somewhere else or you're tired or you're hungry or whatever, they're not going to be hours well spent. Whereas if you spent half that time and the other half making sure that you're looked after, then you're going to have a really good 5 hours, and that's more valuable than 10 rubbish hours.
Yeah.
So I think, in order to balance, and that can be scary and frustrating because you're spending less time, but I think really putting yourself first will enable you to be creative and happier in general.
Thank you so much. It was super lovely to chat with you, and thank you for sharing your positive perspective and thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Gondwana Records podcast.
Coming up next in episode 11 and 12, we sit down with Keelan Rhodes, singer and sound artist from Manchester. Thank you for listening and see you on the other side.